Showing U.S. support for Ukraine while in Kiev.
We are not suggesting we have the answers for you, but we're merely suggesting that we stand ready to stand with you.
Visiting Vice President Joe Biden delivered a stark warning to Russia.
But now it's time for Russia to stop talking and start acting. Act on the commitments that they made. To get pro-Russian separatists to vacate buildings and checkpoints, accept amnesty, and address their grievances politically. We need to see these kinds of concrete steps. We need to see them without delay.
But in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, pro-Russian militias continue to control government buildings in at least 10 towns. A standoff continues in the city of Donetsk, where pro-Russian demonstrators faced down pro-Kiev protesters. The two sides jeered and shouted at each other Tuesday, but no violence was reported. Meanwhile, hundreds of mourners attended the funeral service of 3 pro-Russian men who were killed on an Easter Sunday shootout at a checkpoint near the city of Sloviansk. Russia's foreign ministry is blaming militant Ukrainian nationalists for Sunday's attack, while the Ukrainian security service said it was staged by provocateurs from outside the country. Masked gunmen attended the funeral that hailed the victims as heroes of the separatist drive. Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
We're in the middle of Sloviansk here and seeing that a number of armoured personnel carriers, which seemingly used to be Ukrainian military just a few hours ago, according to the insignia we've seen on them and the flag flying over one of them, are now in the hands of pro-Russian militants here. A mixed bunch of pro-Russian militants, because some of them are clearly less disciplined than the others, who are well-organised, well-trained, have quite impressive weaponry in their possession. Those men are controlling those armoured personnel carriers. For the majority of people we've spoken to, it seems that the Ukrainian troops who at one point were driving them, and I think I saw one Ukrainian soldier still driving a tank to move it around at the orders of the pro-Russian militants. These Ukrainian soldiers haven't defected, according to the majority of people we're speaking to. In fact, they're being held in a building just behind me, and most of the militants we speak to, pro-Russian militants, say they're being fed at this point. There are suggestions there may be a statement in the future, and I can imagine the process now is now they have effectively lost control of their armour and most likely their weapons, whether they surrendered or were forced to at gunpoint. It's not entirely clear. I'm sure there must have been discussions going now about exactly where their future lies here, but it's quite a different change in atmosphere here in Sloviansk. Where we were here 2 days ago, it was entirely hostile towards the foreign press. Now we're seeing a much more relaxed environment. The pro-Russian militants, the more organised ones, running the show, telling everybody what to do, including the local mayor here, who even actually had a brief audience with some of his local people, one of whom complained that his car had been taken from him by some of the pro-Russian militants. I obviously can't confirm that, but it's a sign that the entire community here is not embracing what's happening, although the majority of people we see around these armoured vehicles are quite happy. They're taking pictures. It's a tourist attraction in some ways for those who live here. But it's really interesting in Sloviansk. While we heard yesterday that the Ukrainian security services were about to launch an anti-terror operation, as they say it, of some description in here, there is no sign of the Ukrainian military, apart from those currently, it seems, in the custody of the pro-Russian militants inside a building here. It feels as though this town has changed hands. The increased confidence of the pro-Russian militants here suggests they feel that pretty much the argument's finished. And it was interesting earlier to observe the jets and helicopters flying over Kramatorsk slightly to the south of me, still in the center of that town. There was no sign yet again of the Ukrainian military. Kiev's officials must be wondering what on earth has happened in the last few hours. The paratroopers sent here are said to be from some of their more elite units, and the state of readiness of the Ukrainian military has always been questionable, but also has perhaps their loyalty as well. We don't know what happened here, but it seems as though there are very few reports of shots fired or violence in the changing hands of these vehicles, but they're now paraded in the center of the square. I think these pro-Russian militants are very keen for the entire world to see just how easily they came into their possession.
Okay, so where we are is on one of the roads to the town of Sloviansk. Sloviansk appears to be the focal point of what the Ukrainian government is calling this anti-terror operation. It is a town where pro-Russian militants and protesters have really consolidated their control in recent days, more so than other towns around here. Late yesterday we saw the Ukrainian military move in very closely to this town, taking back a nearby airfield. Where I'm standing now, there is a very heavily armed, well dug in police checkpoint. They're checking all the vehicles moving through here. The contents of the cars, and just around the corner what appears to be another Ukrainian military staging point. A large number of Ukrainian soldiers, armoured personnel carriers, and we're seeing military helicopters and coming and going from this location, including attack helicopters. The question now really is, what is the intention of the Ukrainian military? Are they planning, thinking about moving in and trying to take back this town by force? Because all the noise coming from within the town is that these pro-Russian forces are prepared to fight back. And in a sign of just how complicated all of this is, we're now seeing images from within Selyansk which show armoured vehicles advancing forward under a Russian flag. How is this possible? Well, according to Ukrainian media, pro-Russian forces have taken control of these vehicles. According to Russian media, the Ukrainian officers and soldiers who were driving these vehicles have effectively flipped sides over to the pro-Russian side. So all very fast-moving, very murky, very complex, as we wait to see precisely what the next stage will be in this military operation against these pro-Russian forces.
Today was the day Kiev sent in troops to try to wrest back control of the east. But it didn't go well. Crowds of angry locals surrounded the soldiers and their armoured vehicles. A warning shot fired into the air failed to disperse the protesters just outside the town of Kramatorsk. A short while later, some of those same armoured vehicles are seen on a Ukrainian TV station making much faster progress, but flying a Russian flag. What happened? Were they captured, or did the soldiers defect? If soldiers are defecting, that could be a game changer, a massive boost for the separatist movement. But if they surrendered, on the other hand, what does that say about Kiev's ability to reassert its authority in the region using military means? In nearby Slavyansk, we found some of the missing armoured vehicles, now in the hands of pro-Russian militiamen. We were told not to film the government soldiers who were from a paratroop regiment based in central Ukraine. While a colleague tried to film surreptitiously, I spoke to some of the government soldiers. They told me they'd been surrounded by local residents first, then they said armed men had arrived, taken over their vehicles and driven them to Slavyansk. While we talked, I heard a militia commander order them to hand over their guns.
So the Ukrainian soldiers have been put in those buses behind us and they're being bussed away. They've had their weapons taken away from them and effectively surrendered.
But the excited and sometimes angry crowd believed something very different.
They refused to shoot on us. Some have come over to our side. They volunteered to join our forces. The rest have been given some food and money and are going home.
Outside Kramatorsk, we found the remaining government soldiers still blockaded in by local residents, unable to advance. The commanding officer told me his men had been taken prisoner, not defected. I asked him how he planned to take control of Slavyansk.
What do you mean by taking control of Slavyansk? My understanding is that the local population should be able to live there in peace.
He then said he hoped he and his men would soon be pulling back, withdrawing to their bases in central Ukraine.
Well, the locals here are telling us that this morning when they heard about this main group of armoured vehicles rumbling into town, they came out immediately and stopped them in their tracks. Now, these soldiers clearly haven't been captured, safety in numbers perhaps, but the commanders just told me they're about to withdraw.
In Kiev, an inexperienced new government is coming under immense pressure to bring the situation in the east under control. It's not exactly clear what the Ukrainian military wanted to achieve today. What is clear is that this approach doesn't appear to be working.
And next here now, a kind of dare, double dare between the U.S. and Russia over the simmering tension in the Ukraine. Tonight, those U.S. paratroopers have landed in Poland, a show of force that was not lost on Russia. And ABC's Alex Marquardt is on the ground with what is new tonight.
A show of force as American paratroopers arrived today in Poland, a clear message to Moscow, which responded today saying it's ready to react militarily if its interests are attacked in Ukraine.
Russian citizens being attacked is an attack against the Russian Federation.
Ukraine says it's relaunching its anti-terrorism operation, the so far unsuccessful attempt to quash unrest sweeping eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian forces have seized government buildings, even towns. As tensions rise, so have the number of threats against foreign journalists.
These troops await.
American Simon Ostrovsky, a reporter for Vice News, has been detained for 2 days. Today, we went to see the man now holding Ostrovsky. He was giving incorrect, one-sided information, the mayor told us, adding that Ostrovsky needs to be taught a lesson.
Is he being treated well? Do you plan to release him soon?
He feels fine. We're feeding him well, he said. Nothing unpleasant is happening to him.
The mayor assured us that Ostrovsky would eventually be released. Tonight, the United States is calling on Russia to use its influence with those pro-Russia groups to get him and other detainees out, but so far no sign of his ordeal ending anytime soon.
Ukraine's armed forces are attempting to pinch off rebel supply lines into the tense city of Slavyansk. They briefly overran a pro-Russian military checkpoint, menacing the city's outskirts with armoured vehicles. One person is believed to have been killed not far from here, and Kiev says 4 more died in other clashes. This man was on the spot when the army came and says he knew one of the dead militants.
In the morning, our guys were on the way home and they were gunned down. Soon after, a few military vehicles came out to this roadblock.
The extremists are expecting a bigger attack to come soon.
The Ukrainian government calls these people terrorists. Well, they're not, because they haven't actually committed any acts of terror, not yet. But they are separatists. They do want to carve away the east of the country and establish a nation that they call New Russia. And they're getting a lot of support for that from Moscow.
Russia's media is calling this the start of a civil war, and Moscow has mobilized troops just across the border. Russia's foreign minister says that Washington can no longer freeze his country out when it comes to Ukraine.
The United States tries to behave like winners in the Cold War and acts like it can ignore Russia in European affairs.
This woman is screaming that Russian sympathizers are being shot on their doorsteps. Her cries play into Moscow's threat to invade Ukraine to protect its Russian-speaking population. Ukraine's military moves come amid claims of bloodletting on both sides. An American journalist is still being held by pro-Russian militants, and Ukrainian troops were mobilized after the alleged murder of Volodymyr Rybak, last seen being led away by separatist militants. The politician's wife and family buried him today. More funerals are sure to follow.